So thank you for the introduction, Caroline, and for helping me out with my slides today. I am Kim Rozner, as she said, and I'm very excited to be here today. Delighted to talk about my career, and I know there are people with a lot of different backgrounds that are here and different interests, so hopefully you'll get a nugget of something from what I'm about to cover. So next slide, please. Just to give you a little idea of how roughly my plan-ish is, I'll spend some time talking, try to blast through my background, talk about my career. I'll probably spend the bulk of my time talking about Disney. I was at Disney Feature Animation for 9 years, and that was really the job that gave me the foundation for the rest of the jobs that I ended up having. And I put together some tips that you may hopefully find helpful, and then we can turn it over to Q&A. I'm from a city in Michigan called Warren, Michigan. So it's about 25 minutes outside of Detroit. My dad, like a lot of people in Michigan, worked for the auto industry for many, many years. He worked for a company called Fisher Body. They were based in Warren, Michigan, and that's where I spent the first 20 years of my life. Next slide, okay. This is just a conglomeration of a lot of different animated content that I enjoyed watching as a child and continue to enjoy watching as an adult. So it's kind of a cheat because some of them I have text with, but there's 14 images up here, and I'm wondering, is there anyone who actually recognizes all 14? Impressive, okay. Nice, nice. And what's kind of exciting about this too is, growing up, watching all these animated projects, never would have imagined in my wildest dreams that I would ever get a job in animation. So ended up working for Disney, and then later I'll talk to you about the work that I did on the Peanuts franchise. This is just a goofy little slide. So how many of you feel like you've known for a really long time what you wanted to do when you get out of college? Okay. That wasn't me. I did not know what I wanted to do. So this is just a slide to show you some of my high achievements, aspirations. So as a little girl, I really wanted to be, I originally had this called the squeegee person, but I'm like, I don't know if people will know what squeegees are, like to clean your windows, right? I just thought that was so fascinating. I wanted to be a grocery store cashier. I did think for a period of time I might want to work for GM myself. Calc 2, maybe changed my mind about that. And I always really enjoyed working in math and figures, so I thought that I would be an accountant. Next slide. Okay, so this is blast from the past. So I went to Macomb Community College, which is also in Warren, for 2 years. Got all my basic classes out of the way. Again, did not know what I wanted my major to be, but I did know that I wanted to go to a school in Michigan. So was lucky, got accepted at Michigan State, Michigan, and Eastern, and chose Michigan State. And I was one of those students that until the last possible moment, I did not know what my major was going to be. And then I had to decide, and I liked my marketing classes, so I decided to major in marketing. So I had an internship, that's me, my summer before graduating Michigan State in Washington, D.C., and thought for sure I would work for, say, Frito-Lay or Quaker Oats or one of those, kind of going around to the grocery stores, setting up the end cap displays, and being what they would call an account executive. So I ended up getting an offer with Quaker, and not related, but I heard that AT&T was hiring a lot of people in East Lansing, and the pay was a little bit better, and so money talked for me, and I took the job with AT&T, and there I am front and center. For just about 9 months, I worked for AT&T. Started off as a lead generator, so it was literally, you can tell my age by the way I do the phone, just making tons of phone calls to small businesses to see if they would be interested in buying phone systems or fax machines. Yes, fax machines. Eventually became a salesperson myself, got assigned a territory in southwestern Michigan, right near Kalamazoo, and did the job for a while, and I just really was not feeling like I was connecting with being a salesperson. Pretty outgoing, but there were just things about the job that I just really didn't dig. So I ended up quitting my job, told my parents I'm gonna buy a plane ticket for 1 month. I'm gonna stay on a friend's couch in California. If I find a job, I'm gonna stay in California, and if I don't, I'm gonna come back to Michigan. So it was a pretty gutsy move. Went out to LA and had a bunch of different interviews, lots of different roles, and ended up accepting a job at a company called TCW Realty Advisors, where I worked for 3 years in their marketing department. Next slide, please. I wanted to include this quote because although there was definitely an element of luck involved with me getting my initial interview at Disney, I had to work really hard to create a name for myself, build relationships, and have a network that I could tap into essentially for all the other jobs that I ever had. Like all my other jobs were, I got from people that I knew and had previously worked with. So it's really, really an important point I wanted to make. Next slide. So here I am at this real estate investment company. I mean, that itself just even sounds really boring, but I was in their marketing department. It was a very dry job. And I was living with a bunch of 20-somethings in a beach community, and one of my roommates knew I didn't like my job, and she was actually a production accountant for Mulan at Disney Feature Animation at the time. And she said, oh, I know this guy on my softball team. He's looking for someone in a department called scene planning to do data entry. And I'm like, I know nothing about scene planning. I have done a lot of data entry. That was a really popular job back in the day for internships and summer jobs. So I thought, what the heck? I'll just go for the interview. It doesn't mean I'm gonna get the job. Well, I got the job, and the person that hired me wanted me to make a 2-year commitment, which sounded like an eternity, right? But I said, okay. And so I included here, I was previously, I have a bunch of different last names, so it gets confusing, but my main name was Gray. So that's my first screen credit that I got for Pocahontas. And I also worked on Hunchback and Fantasia. So just really kind of quickly, what the job entailed was, it was back in the days of 2D animation. So we had hand-drawn pieces of art. It was my responsibility to go through the entire stack of artwork, make sure that all the drawings were labeled, and then literally type the label into that thing on the left that's called an exposure sheet. That was my job. And then after that, the drawings themselves would go to the scanning department, and then the scene would live in the computer throughout the rest of its life cycle. Next slide, please. So 2-year commitment. Yikes. Very busy job, worked a lot of hours, and Disney was growing like gangbusters at the time because it was shortly after the wild success of Lion King. So DreamWorks was hiring like crazy, feature animation was growing, and there was a need for a lot of entry-level managers. So fortunately, my boss was cool and let me interview for a manager position, and I ended up getting my first manager gig, and it was on Hercules. So had never managed people before. I mean, it is pretty crazy thinking back to what my job entailed of, and that's me. So what they would do is every department would have a creative head who was responsible for the quality of the art. And then they would have someone like me, we were called APMs, assistant production managers, who worked with the creative heads to figure out who to cast the scenes to, what people should be working on, what their goals should be in a given week, dealing with all the personnel issues that came up with working with a lot of artists. That was interesting. A lot of stories to tell there. And then I just included this. It's a sample of a page from which was very common to do a style guide for the effects for Hercules. So Hercules, based on a Greek myth, these shapes are to mimic, Greek styles and architecture and things like that. So one thing I forgot to mention is I had 75 people working for me, 75 artists, and then we also had to tap into Disney Paris and Disney Orlando. So I'd work really late every day, get everything just kind of tidied up, come in the morning and already, it's what time in Paris and it's what time in Orlando. So just like hit the ground running. Every day was so different. It's one thing you learn too is you can be the best planner and you show up, your day never ends up being what you thought it was going to be. From the moment you step in, it's like, okay, I have to shift my whole train of thinking. So next slide, please. Proceeded to work in the effects department for about 5 years, and I had a couple other opportunities while I was doing that, just because I'd been in the department for a while, kind of knew my job. So I was able to work with the directors for Treasure Planet and the visual development, which was kind of interesting to see. Back in the day, artists in New York and other places throughout the US would fax their designs. I'd retrieve the papers, give them to the directors. So I could see the characters coming to life, the backgrounds coming to life. And then I worked so how many people have heard of Home on the Range? Wow, that is surprising. that is really, that's really surprising. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a conversation, they're like, what? So I was on that film for 3 years. I was on Emperor's New Groove for 3 years, which started off as, might be getting this wrong, like Kingdom of the Sun, then it became Kingdom in the Sun, and then it became the Emperor's New Groove. Home on the Range started out as a film called Sweating Bullets. It was very, very different, and what can happen at times is the story might get a lot of notes during its creative development. The budget continues to get chipped into, and you have to really get creative with how you can contain the project that you want to make with the budget that you have remaining. So 3 years on Home on the Range in a more global role, working with all the different departments on, it sounds really dry, but complexity, to make sure that things were manageable for the process. And then I also really kind of developed an eye for continuity. So I would be constantly kind of scrubbing the reels, seeing if any of the character designs or costumes or props in the background might be amiss, and I'd flag that to the departments. So it just really kind of gave me a good exposure to the whole process. Really kind of fell in love with the Orlando studio. It was just a very different vibe from LA. I had gotten sent there to mentor a brand new manager. 3 weeks turned into 6 weeks, and my husband and I at the time decided we really wanted to relocate to Orlando. The Florida studio closed. Fortunately, I had moved, unfortunately for all the people in the Florida studio. And we had fallen in love with, moving to Orlando. It was just more affordable than LA, just a change of pace. I was ready to do something different. So next slide. I got a job working for EA, and I interviewed, I didn't really know what I was doing because I wasn't really a gamer, so I couldn't really fake it. And I had come from Disney, and at the time, because the Florida studio had closed, EA was really big on wanting to swipe up some of that talent just to have a broader range of, exactly, production people, artists, concept artists, the whole 9 yards. So I went through a series of high-stress interviews, lunch with 7 guys, and I ended up getting hired. My first credit was for NCAA football 2005. And this was before the days of the whole Me Too movement. And I remember I'd have these guys on the team. It was myself and a team of 30 guys. So they'd come up to me and they'd say, we're not really sure how to act around you. And I'm like, I'm just a person, treat me like you would anybody else or whatever. It was very, very interesting, very male dominated. industry, but I was able to hold my own after having been at Disney for a while. So EA was in Florida solely a sports studio, and they ended up getting a non-sports title, which was Superman Returns. And so with my Disney background, I was a natural kind of candidate for that role. So I was able to work on Superman Returns. It was insane. That's when the PS3 was just about coming out. So you're learning the technology. I mean, the team sizes were very small in general compared to what I was used to, but they were quite large on Superman Returns. I probably had about 30 artists, whereas on the other titles I had maybe 10. Superman Returns unfortunately didn't do all that great at the stores, so my next job that I had was still at EA, and they would always kind of change the way that they want to do things. So for some of the time I would, and I'm not a technical person, that's like my worst nightmare. Like, I just don't really understand it. I just have to have smart people around me that I can trust. And so I ended up being in the central department. So I had concept artists, lighters, and effects artists, and I would parse them out to the different teams as they were needed. And then I know people might be I don't know, again, what you've been taught in school or whatever, but I thought I would just kind of touch briefly on the differences that I really see between, say, feature animation and games. So it all really does start with the budget. The budget drives everything. So the size of the budget for feature animation, as you might have known from reading in the newspapers, it can be quite high, right? I'm commonly on projects for 3 years. You multiply a staff of people over the course of 3, 5, 6, 7 years. It can add up. So the budget really drives the schedule and the amount of time that you have to get the work done. So as you're in production, always you're gonna come up with a plan, and the directors, the art director, whatever, they'll have this great idea that they didn't have originally that they'll want to implement in the film, the game, whatever. And so it's like your bucket is only, we used to use this term a lot, it's like a bucket. You have a bucket of money, right? And it's like, we can get that, but that's going to take some money out of the bucket, and we're going to have to figure out what we aren't going to do to allow the time. So it's just this constant, I want to use the word struggle, but it can be a struggle, and you really have to figure out how to balance and keep the creative intent of what the original project is with what it's becoming, right? You want to make it look, you don't want to make it look like the film quality is here, and then all of a sudden, wow, they must have spent a lot of money on that sequence, and then it kind of dips. You have to work to make sure that the quality is pretty consistent throughout. So team sizes are a lot smaller. Again, with the budget, with Disney, it's like you're putting things on film. You have tons of time to explore, go on trips to get inspired by go to Hawaii for Moana. Gee, what do we want, what do we want the designs the backgrounds to look like? Do we want them to look like oil paintings? Do we want them to look like watercolor? I mean, it goes on and on. Games, like the EA Sports games, every year we had to release a new title. So it was chop, chop, lollipop, get it done. And quite often, the really creative aspects, like say cinematics, those would be the first things that would tend to get chopped, because the average game player, or just not the average, but just the game player would be expecting it's in the game, right? So I'd have to make sure that all the uniform textures, stadiums, all that mimicked what people were used to seeing in real life, mascots, etc. That ties into LOD, known as level of detail. So film, you can take days to render something, right, to look beautiful. Not so much with games, right? So when I first started working at EA, I remember just the animation didn't look anything like what I was used to at Disney, right? And the guys would say, "Oh, what do you think of this?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it's amazing," but they had such limitations on how it could actually look. And then that ties into also the number of iterations. ties into the schedule length. It ties into the budget. It ties into what the deadlines are. That all drives and dictates the number of iterations. So less time in the schedule, most likely less number of iterations, and decisions have to be made very rapidly, and you don't have the time to go back and change your mind. So next slide, please. After being at EA for 5.5 years, I kind of felt like, okay, I've done the games thing. Brutal hours. Like, I was in the art department, and the way they used to do it, I hope that they don't still do it like this, but it was like one for all for one. So the developers or the programmers would be there until 2, 3 in the morning. Artists would have to be there until 2, 3 in the morning, just in case they needed something from the art department. So it was a very demanding schedule, much crazier for me than my time at Disney. A lot of hours at Disney, but I wasn't there until like 2, 3 in the morning. So big difference. So I had heard, again, through my network, that there was a small studio called Premise in Orlando, Florida, that was going to be hiring a group of artists to work on Princess and the Frog. So I interviewed with them. I was the production manager. This is me. Like, I don't know, like, if you guys know, like John Musker, Ron Clements, directors of Aladdin, Little Mermaid, Hercules, Treasure Planet, Moana. So this is John over here. You probably can't see with the glasses. Well, they both have glasses, the taller guy, and that's Ron. That's the producer, who's also been the producer for Frozen. Peter Delvecchio, he's still there. And I was able to work with a lot of my friends and former colleagues that were still at LA and at Disney. So it was fun. It was comfortable. We already had a relationship established. I had really long gigs up until that point. I was at Disney for 9 years. I was at EA for 5.5. And when I took this job, I knew it was only for a year, but I was just so ready to make a change. I thought, that's okay, I'll take it. So this job really kind of helped me get into a different mindset where I became more project-based versus the days of working at a studio and you would just roll from one project onto the next, right? That doesn't really happen as much anymore. So next slide, please. So kind of randomly, I was looking for a job, and a friend of mine said, hey, I know this guy that I work with at Disney. He's at this company, visual effects company in London called Double Negative. He's looking for an animation producer, and I'm thinking, I never worked in VFX, never technically been an animation producer, never been to London, but what the heck, put my name in the hat, just see what happens. And one thing you'll also learn is that you learn through your career who you can really kind of trust when it comes to recommendations. Some of them are, you just know if someone recommends someone, it's going to be really, really solid. Other people, you might be, not so sure. So fortunately for me, I had come with a strong recommendation. And so after 2 30-minute phone calls to these people in London, they said, okay, we want to hire you. I'm like, what? Don't you want to ask me more questions? I mean, this just feels really kind of sudden. And he said, no, you come really strongly recommended. I implicitly trust that person. So we'd love to hire you. So we packed up our bags, moved to London 6 weeks later. And I was hired primarily to work on John Carter. Is that familiar to people? Okay. So it's originally John Carter of Mars. Then it went through this big marketing thing. They decided to chop it off. It was very controversial. So it was just John Carter. It's about a Civil War veteran who wakes up on the surface of Mars, and he just goes through this crazy adventure. So before I jump into John Carter, what I did in the meantime, as that project was ramping up, is a lot of studios have what's called artist management. So it's a group of people who really are there dedicated to understand an artist's skills, understand what they might be slightly challenged at, and figure out how to help them. Is there training that can be done? Is there a mentor that they can be assigned to? And so I was in this artist management kind of role, and we had a team of like 25 to 30 animators that supported the entire studio. So I would parse them out to these different projects that I have listed over, images over here I have. So for John Carter, so here's perspective, 25 to 30 animators for the entire studio. John Carter was the biggest animation project that DNEG had ever taken on. Going through the script, having the department head, the head of animation, bid it, he determined we needed 115 animators. So we had a huge recruiting drive. I mean, we were interviewing people from all over the world, and it was, not super easy, but it was decently easy to get visas for people, and everyone worked in-house. So everyone came from, lots of people from the US, lots of people from countries all over the world. So we had 115 animators on John Carter. We had 70 animators that were focused on shots, and we had, if I'm doing, did I say 110, 115? It's like 40 to 45 that concentrated on crowds. And that was a really hard thing. Everyone wants to work on shots. People don't really, crowds are just kind of like, they're in the background, whatever. So that was a very challenging aspect of that project, is to keep a team of 45 animators really jazzed and energized about doing crowd animation, just trying to say, well, if this film does well, we'll have lots of other opportunity, which we meant. And unfortunately, it didn't do well at the box office. So we had to sadly shrink the animation team, shrink all the teams, back to their kind of like original size. So you go from 115, now you're back to like 20, 25. Those were not easy conversations to have by any means. Next slide. So then my husband got an opportunity in Santa Monica when I had obviously previously lived in LA, and I said, well, we thought we were going to stay in London, but never hated living in Southern California. So we ended up moving back. I was trying to figure out, again, every time I'd end a job, it's like, what do I want to do when I grow up, So I started a network, and I talked to one studio that was considering me for artist management, but they wanted me to move to Vancouver, and I just relocated from London, so I was like, yeah, that's not really going to work. So several weeks later, the woman I had interviewed with called me up, and she's like, just hear me out, because I would go through phases where I'd want to get out of production just because the daily stress and the grind would get to me, so I'd have like the more global role. Artist management, you're not like directly in the trenches, right? So she said, just hear me out. We have this client. They're looking for a production manager. I'm like, I don't want to do this. And she said, I know. Just go to the interview. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Ended up getting hired on Angry Birds as senior production manager. And so we had, it was an interesting project. So it was essentially like a startup studio. We were like building literally the infrastructure in the studio itself, building the pipelines, coming up with all of the basics that were needed. And so the studio in LA, what we did, so we were on what was called like the client side. So we had story, editorial, design, and pre-visualization. So that was created in LA, and then we worked with Sony Pictures Imageworks up in Vancouver. We would hand off everything to them. So I was on that project for 3 years. We're hearing a theme here, another 3 years. And it was challenging. I mean, we had two teams. So we had two directors, two producers. So we had a director and a producer in LA, and we had a director and a producer up in Canada. Just communication is challenging when you have everyone in the same building. Now we're learning a lot more working from home about how many more layers of complexity that adds to it. So it was a real challenge, but we reproduced the film. And then I was able to, just a couple cool perks. My husband and I were in the Macy's Day Parade, and I happened to be in Athens on vacation after the film wrapped, and my boss flew me out to Helsinki to go to the wrap party. So those are just a couple little cool perks I thought I'd throw in there. Okay. And then I had continued to have project-based work. I worked for a few different little studios, and some of the projects were great. And I kind of, you know, you reach a certain point in your career, I reached a certain point in my career where just if things didn't really feel right in my gut, I always trusted my gut. Some of those opportunities weren't really right for me. And I ended up leaving one of the projects, which I had never done before the project ended. Like, that was just kind of like a no-no, but I decided that I needed to do so kind of for my own mental health. You know, it just was it was a toxic environment for me. So I quit one of my jobs, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And again, someone that I had previously worked with was looking for someone on the Peanuts. So I worked for a company called Wild Brain, and LA was where the directors were based. And so we did the story and the editorial. We had the production designer in LA, but all the artists were up in Vancouver. So it was pretty cool, like just being there from inception of the script, sitting in the creative meetings with, so Charles Schultz is been deceased for some time, but his son and grandson are still very involved in the property. So we'd be on calls with them, you know, them fiercely, for obvious reasons, wanting to protect the brand. And so that was right around the whole project was done, work from home. So it was March, get the years right, 2020, is that when things really started to go awry? Yeah. So I was going to be starting my job, went into the office, picked up my laptop thinking, oh, this would be like 2 weeks or something. Little did I know, right? So we ended up creating all the infrastructure that was required. I mean, it was not easy. One of the biggest challenges for us technically was setting up the editorial department. That was a real beast, just for people to be able to work from home and all the different internet speeds, and it was very, very complicated. I had very strong technical people who figured that all out. And so the first project came out, and it's on Apple TV Plus for New Year's of this year. And then these are 2 upcoming projects that are also going to be on Apple TV. The first one ties into Earth Day, and then the second one ties into Mother's Day. They're super cute. I'm super proud of them. So maybe you'll get to see them. This is kind of a last-minute ad, but I was thinking, you know, what was it about my job that I really, really liked? And so thought a lot about it, and I laughed a lot. I mean, not to toot my own horn, I think I have a pretty good sense of humor, and you know, you need outlets when you're in super stressful situations. So you got to really connect with your team. You've got to be able to joke around, otherwise you're just gonna like literally blow a gasket probably. So laughter, just the amazing talent I've been able to work with over the years, and the relationships that I've been able to make. And it really is a small world, you know, just how there's a lot of overlap. Even though I worked in different industries, there's similar. It's like, oh my gosh, you're working in this industry now. You know, it's pretty small. Always learning. I mean, not only did I go from feature animation, which I knew nothing about, to games, knew nothing about, visual effects, knew nothing about, to TV, nothing about, right? And even while you're in feature animation, for an example, the technology's changing, like just things just change, processes change. It's not static at all. And then just, you know, project pride, just being able to see the final project, and it's just amazing how it's a very common thing that we would all kind of experience. Is it could just be a total nightmare of a project, but it just all kind of disappears when you're sitting in the theater and you see the project up on the big screen and you think, yeah, it was worth it. You know, it's really worth it. Next slide, please. How am I doing on time? What time are we at? Oh gosh, okay. I got to really quick. Oh shoot, it's talking too much. Sorry. This is just a quick quote that I found. Okay, yeah. So I ended up doing that. Next slide. These are just outtakes that didn't make the cut for my presentation. Next slide. Tips. Okay, this is really what I kind of want to get to. So next slide, please. I know there's a lot of stuff up here, but I made a slide for getting the job, right? And so just kind of starting off in the left, always take an interview, even if you think it's like the most inane, it's not going to float, I'm not interested in it type of opportunity. You never know who you're going to meet. You never know who they know. You never know how that might help you at some point in your future. Questions. I can't stand when I'm interviewing and you get to the end and you say, okay, do you have any questions for me? And really think long and hard about some really good questions that you can ask, because there's no way that I would have answered every single question you had. People love to talk about themselves. So, for example, you could say, well, how did you get into this industry? Turn it around to them. They'll love to, they'll eat that up. Focus on your strengths. Don't go into an interview thinking, because like for me, which I would do this, I'm not a technical person. Like I don't really understand all the ins and outs and rendering and blah, blah, blah. Don't focus on that. Focus on what you're really good at and sell that aspect. LinkedIn, social media. Keep your portfolios updated, reflect new material. Feel free to reach back to people to say, hey, I've actually updated my reel since the last time I was in touch with you. People really appreciate that. It's good to have job experience, even if it's completely irrelevant. It just shows that you can be dependable, you can hold a job, you understand structure, and you can work within a structure. Email subjects, be really explicit when you're looking for a job. It's helpful because recruiters get so many emails. Just you want to be able to specify what job it is that you're after. Are you willing to work full-time, part-time, freelance, internship? Because they can go back in their email later and search and find you if you're maybe not the right fit at the time. Humor, I already touched on. Titles. It's never really, like, through my career, I didn't really ever get all that big into titles, so I don't be shied away from a title sounding less than something that you feel that you deserve, because titles can also mean different things in different industries. So a producer in feature animation is very different from a producer in games, right? So don't get all wrapped up in that. It's about the experience. Thank yous. Whether it's an informational interview or like an in-person interview, whatever, just keep it brief, acknowledge it. That goes a long way. To me, I found over the years, the team that you're on really is what it's all about. If you happen to be working on a cool project, that's a nice bonus, but you're dealing with this team day in and day out. And that's, to me, the most important thing that you need to have the chemistry for. Be kind, small industry. When I would bounce from one industry to the other, it's amazing. I'd say, oh, I actually work with that person at Disney. So then people would reach out and they'd say, hey, does anyone here know this person? So your reputation travels with you. It doesn't just stay at that studio. So be nice to everyone, regardless of their title. And then I just put crickets up there in case you don't hear back. It's okay to check back once, but probably wouldn't do it more than that because you're going to come across as being desperate and you're just going to be kind of annoying. So as much as it might hurt your ego, try to avoid doing that. We should just probably go to questions, and maybe some of these questions will come up. Sorry. Do you guys have any questions? Speaking of that, do you guys have any questions?
Does it work? Oh, it does. Okay. So we're going to have questions asked through the middle aisle. If you have a question, please come up to the microphone, wait in the line, and we'll be able to hear you that way. So thank you.
And if you're not comfortable, I get it. If you're not comfortable getting on a microphone and saying your question in front of the group, I'm going to be around till around noon. So I'd be more than happy to meet with you guys, to talk to you. I have some business cards that I can pass out. I really do enjoy mentoring people that are just getting into the business. I am part of an organization called Rise Up Animation. They support the BIPOC community. So I'm a mentor. I volunteer my mentor services. I love to look at resumes, critique, give pointers. So for those of you who are looking for additional mentoring help, I'd be happy. Yes, hi.
You mentioned you did some managerial roles without a background in management.
Yes.
So I'm sure you learned a lot of great things about what it takes to be a good manager.
Yes.
Could you share some of those things that you learned, please?
I can. So I think it's important to have, and everyone loves to overuse this word transparency, but I'm a firm believer that you should always really be, as a manager, upfront with the people that work for you, and not be, afraid to have difficult conversations if the difficult conversations are needed. It's helpful to give, feedback. You don't have to overdo it, but just let people know really how they are doing and where they stand with you. I was always big on scheduling. Of course, not at Disney with 75 artists. I would never have been able to do it, but one-on-ones with people. So I'd meet with them, once every 2 weeks or once a month, just to touch base. How's it going? I think it's also good to ask whoever you're working for, what is their preferred mode of communication. So I've seen a lot of instances along the way where communication is a real issue, and you come to find out, it could have just been a simple conversation. A manager could have just said, I really don't like when you Slack me all day long, nonstop, that's super helpful. Is that good? Yeah, okay. I learned a lot. I just couldn't encapsulate it in a minute, but go. Hi.
Did you ever experience any kind of ideological gatekeeping in the workspace? Did you ever work with anybody who made it feel like if you didn't agree with them on things that didn't even seem prudent, that it would be harder to work with them?
Oh, definitely. And that's one of the jobs. Not that this would be my advice, but that's one of the jobs that I actually quit. I had heard a lot of negative things about someone that ran one of the studios, and I thought, how hard can it be? I've dealt with a lot of challenges throughout my career. It's only for a year. I can do this. And I discovered that I really couldn't. He was quite demeaning and just really wasn't willing to. You have to really get good too as you go along in your career, reading the room, because there's certain approaches that would work better with different people. You can't just go in if you go in with a bull in a china shop, you're probably not going to last, and you're going to have a lot of people working with you that really wish that they didn't.
Hi there.
Hi.
So working in a male-dominated industry, I was wondering if there was any studios that you really enjoyed, that were super healthy and.
So look, just to be clear, I don't want to come across like EA was not something that I liked because it was male dominated. I just want to clarify that for the room. I think the studios just in general, with Wild Brain being my last job, they have gotten really, really involved. I worked for a studio called Skydance with the LGBTQ community, representation. It's becoming something that people can't ignore anymore. So that's a great thing to just kind of ask about when you're interviewing, so you can get a sense of the company culture and how they might approach that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I'm sure a lot of people around my age would agree that, it's kind of difficult to find an interest that you have because there's so many things to choose from. And, how do you go about finding the one interest to focus on? Because, personally, I have a lot of interest in a lot of things that I enjoy. And, if you do find it, how do you also avoid burnout and things like that when you do that?
That's a tough question to answer. That's a really tough question. As I might have conveyed myself, after every job, I'd be like, what do I want to do next? Think about what you really like spending your time doing. Think about maybe the type of culture that you're interested in. So TV is very fast paced, compared to feature animation. Games are also fast paced. I think it's important to just, like, it doesn't have to be, and your interests change over time. That's another point I'd like to make. So I know production people that have said, this sucks, and I'm sick of like dealing with all the headache and the stress, and they went to art school, and they became artists. So they didn't have to worry about that. They would just, show up, be able to show up, do their work, and that was good. Conversely, I'm actually mentoring a couple people right now who are artists, and they want to make the transition to production. So I'm working with them to restructure their resumes so they're having some of those buzzwords, those pivotal words that can show up in a search to help them expand that. So your interest can change over time. Just don't be afraid to take a chance, right? Life's pretty short, and you can always just recover.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's very vague, but like that's just kind of the reality of the situation. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I was just wondering, what was your favorite production or movie you've done? Or one of them. I should say one of them.
Yeah.
One of them.
So Disney gave me a super, super solid foundation. And it's interesting, as I got along in my career, there were jobs that I had that I thought at the time, oh my gosh, it could possibly not get any worse than this. And I'd go somewhere else and be like, oh my God, that actually really wasn't that bad. It's just, you get this interesting perspective. I think because it's probably freshest in my mind, and I really loved the production team I was able to put together. I really did enjoy my last gig, which was working on Peanuts. Just seeing the property that I grew up with come to life and keep its integrity. And so I'd probably say that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I included up here just a couple resources that I thought you might find helpful that I just learned about as I was preparing for this presentation. So the one on the left, there's a studio called Titmouse, and that's kind of a lengthy, it's over an hour, but well worth it if you are an artist and you're putting together a portfolio. It also has lots of good tips for production people, but it's specifically for your portfolio and things to keep in mind, things to avoid. And then I also came across this it's rather short, but it does a nice job of highlighting the differences between feature and TV animation.
What advice would you give students as they approach internships?
Internships are super, super important if you can land them. And what did I say? That's a good question. I thought about that. Again, maybe it's similar to just my overall interest. How do you focus on one thing? Like, I think you should be exploring, right? That's your opportunity to really kind of explore. If you're maybe not sure, if you're kind of between a couple different industries, like just give it a try. I don't know. That's a tough question. Does anyone in the audience, so like a professor, what would you guys say for that, for internships? Oh, okay.
So thank you very much for your presentation and your knowledge to our students. It's really inspiring to see you finding that drive and inspiration to switch so multiple roles and serving those roles, going places, and like living the dream. It's every student's dream here to pursue such things in the industry. So many a times what happens with some students is that for various reasons, whether it be discrimination in a workplace and news that shows up in the media regarding those things, financial reasons, or whatever it may be, they impact the drive that they bring to the classroom. It impacts their dreams, shattered dreams. We do not want that. So what are some tips you can provide to keep that dream alive, to keep that drive going forward?
Let me think about that. Well, I think, it's important to just know, because I know myself, I've gone for an interview and I thought, oh my gosh, I totally nailed that, and I don't get the job. I'm like, what the heck? What went wrong? it's hard to realize it at the time, but there is a reason why I wasn't meant to get those jobs, right? I think it's really important too, my quote about luck. Just if you can always feel like you're prepared, right? So when an opportunity does arise, you're not going to dangle, and you're going to seize the opportunity, and you're going to decide to try it. Like, what's the worst you can do, right? I almost got, just quick segue, but I almost got fired when I was working at Disney. So email was pretty new as a mode of communication, and I was on Hercules, worked for someone who just did not like my style of communication. I was too blah, 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 too wordy, not getting to the point. And I found out years later that the production manager that they had replaced, the new person came on board. The first job that they were told to do was to fire Kim Gray. And fortunately for me, that person said, I don't even know Kim Gray. Like, I'd like to get to know her. Ended up figuring out that it was my style of communication in email. So he worked with me, assigned me a mentor. And even to this day, I'm so gun shy. I just want to make sure that I kind of get to the point. I'm not just rambling. So you just got to persevere, I overcame that, and just got to keep on going.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. I don't know if that answered your question. I feel like a politician, but well, thank you everyone for your time.